Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay, can you see me okay? Okay, great, we're set. So I was born in Argentina. I moved to Israel when I was 16. I lived in Israel for 9 years. Then we moved to Canada. We lived in Canada for 15 years. And then we moved to Australia. We lived in Australia for 3 years. And then we moved to Nashville, Tennessee, which is where I got my accent from. And we spent 4 years in Nashville, and then we moved to Miami, and we've been in Miami for 13 years. And when you add it all up, I'm 27 years old. So one thing I discovered living in various places is that many different, even contradictory behaviors can have common origins. And these are the need to matter and the need to belong. But not every place makes you feel like you belong. We used to have a friend in Nashville who said, Nashville is a city that makes you feel more welcome than you really are. Think about that for a moment. And we have a friend here in Miami who says, Miami is a city that makes you feel less welcome than you really are. So think about that. So appearances can be deceiving, but you really know when you feel welcome in a place, right? You feel it inside. So we know that Nashville makes you feel more welcome than you are. Miami makes you feel less welcome than you really are. So today, we're going to explore this feeling of belonging and mattering through two lenses, okay? We're going to see it first through the laughing side. I write humor on the side, so I think it's important to look at things from a humor lens. So the first few minutes of this presentation, we're going to use one subject, moi, to look at mattering through a laughing side, and then we're going to talk about the research, about the learning side of mattering. So is everybody okay with this plan? Yeah. Okay, great. So I have to admit that at first, it was hard for me to understand what gives people meaning in Miami. You know, I came here, we lived all over the place, and it was really hard to understand what gives people meaning in Miami, but then it all became very clear. Miami is the only city in the world without a prefrontal cortex. You know, people without a prefrontal cortex, they find meaning in plastic surgery, corruption, and driving without signaling, okay? So this is what gives people meaning in Miami. Welcome to my home. I hope you enjoy your time here. Now, growing up, I've always had lots of insecurities. I don't know, do you have insecurities? Yes, thank you. I'm not the only one. I grew up having lots of insecurities. Even before I was born, I had lots of insecurities. I have to admit, before I was born, my primary concern was to beat 300 million sperm in the quest to fertilize an egg. So then, as a newborn, I had other concerns. I had two main concerns. Right, I am newborn, I'm here in the world, I'm going crazy. Two main concerns. One is circumcision, and the second one is feeling guilty for crying during the procedure. So that was hard. So by studying mattering, I'm hoping to overcome other existential worries, such as my big ears, my girly voice, and my envy of people who fly first class. Okay, so, you know. So, as you probably know, if you want to feel like you matter, you have to belong. But it's really difficult to belong if you don't understand the language or the culture of a place. So, with all my moves, for most of my life, I felt culturally clueless and linguistically lost. You know, although I spoke Hebrew pretty well by the time I met my parents-in-law, who were both Hebrew teachers, they subjected me to etymological colonoscopies for hours on end. That was very hard. And then, as if I wasn't confused enough, then we moved to Australia. And moving to Australia was very challenging because I had to unlearn a lot of the things that I learned in North America when I lived in Canada. So when I finally got what football was in North America, which is basically wrestling with a giant suppository, then I was introduced to Aussie rules football, which is part Cirque du Soleil and part Bull Stampede, okay? I could never get that. Now, moving to Australia was also challenging because I had to learn a bunch of new sayings, okay? So in Australia, they have these very cute sayings, like the first one is chakesiki. Chakesiki means stay home pretending you're sick. And then chake-wobbly. Chake-wobbly means throw a temper tantrum. And I can't tell you what's crack-fat, but I can tell you that they recommend Crackiagra or Crackialis for it, okay? So, and now, if I wasn't confused enough, coming to the US was very challenging. Here I discovered that when presidents are under investigation, they develop something that I called electile dysfunction. And it's characterized by regression to the age of 2, impulse to destroy the country, and love affair with dictators. So it's really hard to move around so much. You don't know whether you belong, whether you're coming or going. But I'm trying to do my best here in Miami. So now this is the part I also have audience participation, okay? So this is the part where I get to ask you a question. You get to answer, and there may be a prize involved. I don't know. So let's see. Did you laugh during this part of the presentation? Yes. Raise your hand. Okay, great. Okay, so now this is the prize. Okay, so Ora and I, my wife and I, we wrote a trilogy. It's called The Laughing Guide to Well-Being, The Laughing Guide to Change, and The Laughing Guide to a Better Life. And the books combine humor with science to promote happiness and well-being. So again, raise your hand if you had a good time. Okay, so you get, and did you see somebody else having fun? Yes. Who did you see that was having fun? Oh, you got another copy. Okay, so let's move. Who else is having fun over here? Okay, so you got a copy of the book. Okay, and you got a copy of the book. Okay. I think this is a good time to finish my talk. Everybody's happy. Thank you. Goodbye. Now, I promised I would give you the learning side, which is what the science says about mattering, which is a really important topic. So now I'm going to put my serious face and my scientist face, and let's talk seriously what mattering is about. So when there is a sense of mattering in a community, we witness two things. There is a great deal of wellness, and there is a great deal of fairness in the community. And according to the research, people who experience mattering, they also experience other important experiences in life: self-compassion, autonomy, mastery, positive relations, overall well-being. You see a number of positive outcomes that are associated with mattering. But when mattering is blocked, we experience all kinds of problems. So depression around the world is affecting 322 million people. This is the equivalent of everyone in the United States of America walking around with a serious depression. Around the world, 85% of workers are either disengaged or actively sabotaging the workplace. This is about 85% of workers, okay? And around the world, extreme ideologies are on the rise, posing a serious threat to liberal democracies. So we have to ask ourselves, what do depression, disengagement, and nationalism, what do they have in common? They reflect a feeling of lack of mattering. And when people feel that they don't matter, when we feel devalued, there are real negative psychological, organizational, and political consequences. Some of these consequences are internal, we get depressed, but some are external, we become aggressive towards other people. So in 1890, a famous psychologist, William James from Harvard, said the following: if every person we met cut us dead and acted as if we were non-existent things, a kind of rage and impotent despair would before long well up in us. A kind of rage and impotent despair before long would well up in us. We see a lot of that today around the world, don't we? When people we meet cut us dead, they treat us as non-existent things, we react viscerally. Okay? Now, some of the people who feel most invisible in society are people living in poverty. Linda Tirado, who recently wrote a memoir about growing up and living on minimum wage in the United States of America, said the following: the problem I have isn't just being undervalued, it's that it feels as though people go out of their way to make sure you know how useless you are. Now, on a personal level, when we feel that we are disregarded, stress hormones flood our system, and resentment grows. Okay? But it's not only people living in poverty who feel neglected and excluded. Most of us have felt marginalized in one way or another. It happens when the boss puts you down in front of your colleagues. It happens when people ignore you at a cocktail party. It happens when government officials abuse their power. So all of us have experienced, people from all backgrounds have experienced to some extent a sense of marginalization, lack of mattering, feeling devalued. At a societal level, what happens is that when we devalue one another, conflict increases, obviously. Now, sometimes conflict can lead to more freedom because it leads to a struggle for more emancipation. For example, we have recently seen the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement. These are movements for more freedom. But sometimes when we devalue one another, there are other movements that come up. For example, we have seen recently the rise also of xenophobic movements, right? And on top of all of that, there are other social factors that make it hard for us to treat one another like we matter. So let's explore that. Narcissism has reached epidemic proportions in recent decades. Inequality around the world has also reached unprecedented levels. And despite the growing evidence concerning climate change, we continue to ignore its consequences. So what do all these problems, narcissism, inequality, environmental entitlement, what do they have in common? They reflect the belief that some people are worth more than others, okay? Some people feel overvalued, that it is okay for them to take up more resources despite the consequences on other people. So what can we do, we should ask, to fight this social decay, this social disintegration? So first of all, we need to understand what mattering is all about. So mattering, the sense of mattering, consists of two things: feeling valued and adding value. Now, by feeling valued, I mean feeling appreciated, feeling recognized, feeling respected. But this is only 50% of the equation. To feel like we matter, we also need to feel like we are adding value, that we can make a contribution, that we can make a difference in the world. And there are two ways to feel valued. We can feel valued by ourselves, but we can also feel valued by others. And the two are related. And we can add value to ourselves, and we can add value to others in the community. Now, the more we feel valued, the more secure we are in our ability to make a contribution. Because we feel valued by other people, we feel secure, we make a contribution to other people, and the more we contribute to others, the more we feel valued. And when all of this works well, we end up with a beautiful self-reinforcing cycle. But when the need to feel valued is thwarted, we don't really feel the capacity to add value because we feel ignored, we feel insecure. And if we are not able to add value because we don't feel valued, that can lead to a vicious cycle. So when the need to feel valued is really frustrated, when we don't feel valued, we develop one of two types of problems. We feel either invisible or entitled. And when the need to add value, to make a contribution is frustrated, we develop either helplessness or ruthlessness. None of these are good options, right? So the lack of mattering really has negative, pernicious consequences. So I believe that the rise in aggression or oppression, aggression or depression, they have a cultural basis. And I believe that a lot of our problems derive from some cultural norms. Now, look at this statement. I have the right to feel valued so that I may be happy. I bet most of us identify with this statement to some extent, right? I have the right to feel valued so that I may be happy. Now, the thing is that this is 100% correct about 50% of the problem. Okay? So think about that. The focus on the self, while positive in many ways, can also lead to self-preoccupation, to being infatuated with ourselves and neglecting other people, right? So ironically, what's going to make us happy in the long term is not an exclusive focus on ourselves. What's going to make us happy is to know how to balance a focus on ourselves with a focus on other people. We matter when we feel valued by ourselves and others, and when we add value to self and others. Adding value just to ourselves is not going to make us happy. And this proclivity is reinforced in society by many cultural factors, such as social media, selfies, and personal branding, right? So if a me culture is a problem, and our hosts were talking a few minutes ago about a me culture, about individualism, what's the solution? Well, I believe we should be fostering a we culture, not a me culture, a we culture. And in a we culture, we all have the right and responsibility to feel valued and add value so that we may all experience wellness and fairness. I call this a we culture. Imagine what would happen if we lived in a place where everybody felt valued and everybody was able, had an opportunity to add value. What would happen if we lived in a culture like that? Well, there is evidence that we cultures achieve higher levels of happiness and health and well-being than me cultures. So we cultures enjoy higher life expectancy, math, literacy, trust, and social mobility. And we cultures experience lower levels of infant mortality, homicides, imprisonment, teenage birth, obesity, and mental illness. So a colleague of mine and I conducted a study comparing countries along a social justice index. In Germany, they developed a social justice index consisting of various elements, such as poverty reduction, inclusion in the labor force, intergenerational justice, etc. And we were able to correlate levels of social justice with life satisfaction around the world. And what we found was that countries that enjoy higher levels of social justice, the people in these countries report higher levels of life satisfaction. And put in another way, as inequality increases, problems increase as well. So we can see here that as income inequality grows, the problems grow. So as I told you a few minutes ago, we were living in Canada about 20 years, then we moved to Australia, and then we moved to the USA. And according to this graph, I'm going definitely in the wrong direction. But this is what the research says. Now, it is not only countries that benefit from more equality and fairness, organizations where there is a sense of mattering, they also experience a lot of benefits. When people in organizations feel like they matter, there is a great deal of benefits. So we conducted a study here with our workforce at the University of Miami to create a culture of mattering. And what we saw was that when people feel like they matter in an organization, like our university, a sense of inclusion and engagement go up. That's not surprising, but it's also beautiful to see that as engagement and inclusiveness goes up, well-being goes up as well. So we can see that in our own employees, when they feel like they matter, they feel like they are engaged, and their overall purpose, social, financial, physical, and community well-being go up as well. We started doing this work at the University of Miami approximately 7 years ago. That's one of my main jobs at the university, to promote a culture of belonging. I'm the Vice Provost for Institutional Culture. And I'm proud to report that in 2017, Forbes listed the University of Miami as the #1 employer in the education sector in the country. So mattering really makes a difference. Mattering in the workplace, mattering in the community, mattering in society, mattering in relationships. Now, so if we want to promote mattering and wellness for all, we should also embrace fairness for all. So fairness is about treating everybody with respect. Our children, our co-workers, our neighbors, our community members. And when we treat people with fairness and with respect, they achieve a sense of mattering because they feel valued. And they are given opportunities to add value to their lives, to the community, to their families. And the more people matter, as we saw in the research I showed, the higher the levels of wellness. Now, but let me be clear. I don't think mattering is just about being nice to one another. Mattering goes beyond empathy and charity. Mattering is about dismantling structural injustice that pervades many societies. Mattering is about the basic human right to a life of dignity, where universal health care, good housing, high-quality public education, and a living wage are afforded to all and not just to a privileged few. I also believe that we must do justice by future generations, and that includes working for a healthier planet. I personally believe that we should also do justice by other species, which is why I eat a plant-based diet. it makes me feel better, it is better for the environment, and it's better for other creatures. Thank you. Now, when you think about it, I feel like I matter because I'm making a contribution to myself. I think I'm healthier, I feel better, but I'm also making a contribution to the planet. Being vegan is one of the greatest contributions you can make to a sustainable planet. And I'm also making a contribution to other creatures. Now, all over the world, everybody wants to matter. We just need to be able to open opportunities for people, to treat them with respect, to institute policies of social justice. Because I believe that when everybody matters, our families, our workplaces, our relationships, our communities, and the entire planet, all of us together will reach higher levels of prosperity. So let me leave you with this. I believe that there is no wellness without fairness. Thank you very much. Wonderful.